before we do anything else, we would like to explain to you that the meeting is being recorded, and many people would probably get a pop-up in their computers right now warning you about this. Now, the attendees of the show are not really being recorded because it's only the panelists and speakers who are being recorded, but there is also possibility to take active part through the Q&A button, where you can state questions to the speakers and to the panel. And there is also a chat if needed. Before anything else, and before introducing the panel of speakers, it's my pleasure and honor today to introduce the welcome address of this meeting, which is going to be delivered by Philip Tolkens, who is the head of unit of the Unit for Climate and Planetary Boundaries in the Director General for Research and Innovation in the European Commission. So without further ado, I leave the word to you, Philip.
Thank you very much. Just to confirm, technically, it works fine?
Absolutely.
Okay. So thank you for your kind introduction. And I want to, of course, first thank the researchers for organizing this meeting and for bringing the work to this very advanced stage. At the closing of this long-running project, I, but also my colleagues here attending, are really curious about the lessons learned on how they can be converted in policy action. I think the public today is mixed. We have some researchers who participated in projects. We have some policymakers from Commission services, but perhaps from other entities. This is the goal of today's discussion, is also to have an exchange and to learn from you on what we can also understand, because I saw some slides that look pretty complex to understand. So I hope that the presentation would be clear so that you can bear with the relative knowledge of some civil servants, including me, who wish to take time to understand these very dense slides and to more importantly understand how they can make use of this in their daily work. So I would say that based on earlier workshop I attended and outputs I have seen, I would say that MAGIC has been striking in providing analysis in a broad context on the climate and resource challenges. MAGIC covered different issues on different timescales, geographic scope, and based its finding on outcomes from different disciplines. Ranging from economic analysis to energetics, and from demographics to quantitative analysis of resource use. It has always been thought-provoking and even, I would say, provocative, which I welcome. I welcome provocative thinking if it's useful, as scientific inquiry has to be. So this is very important and appreciated. However, I mean, since the project started in 2016, if I recall well, many developments have happened in the area. And these developments have mostly highlighted the urgency of the climate challenge. You know that. We have seen the release of the 3 IPCC special reports, the 1.5 degree report in 2018, the special report on land, and the special report on the oceans and the cryosphere in 2019. And they all highlighted the enormous risk humanity is facing if we fail to act. And these reports are providing very important conclusions and policy relevant findings in the areas covered by MAGIC project. These reports contain the evidence showing that with sufficient and efficient action, we have a chance to keep warming at a level that would avoid experiences the worst impacts. I put it in oversimplified terms, just for the sake of time here. We have also seen the emergence of unprecedented awareness to the global challenges among citizens at large, in particular in the youth. The Fridays for Future, the Extinction Rebellion have become defining phenomena in many parts of the world, and in particular in Europe. I would say that both the reinforced scientific evidence through these reports, research results provided by EU project and others, duly relayed in the EU policy-making process, and this is a very important, that we try to improve the chain of transmission of knowledge from you researchers to those who have to prepare the policies. And this added to the pressure from the streets, they have had a clear impact on policymakers, at least in Europe. As you all know, the EU has increased its climate ambition, and we are now pursuing a climate neutrality objective by 2050. And as part of that effort, the Commission has just proposed to increase the EU 2030 target to 55% reduction in net greenhouse gas emission compared to 1990. You all know this, but I do repeat, because it is a significant change. And it's never enough when we have to deal with an environment and climate policies, but such change, such move at a fast pace for the usual timescale of policy making is quite impressive in my view. And it's in part due to an improvement in the transmission of knowledge from the world of scientists to the world of policymakers, and this supported by the popular support to change. In addition to this significant enhancement of efforts on climate mitigation, the policymakers are now working also on the recovery plans from the still ongoing pandemic. The relevant EU research on decarbonization pathways and on the Nexus discussed today will be accounted for in the preparation and in the review of the recovery and resilience plans. This is to make sure that they integrate and not undermine the climate sustainability objectives. I'm sure that you also have seen that in the context of the Green Deal adopted by the Commission, some very important principles have been adopted, such as the do no significant harm, and efforts have been made in integrating the different dimensions of one issue and to pursue systemic solution. Systemic solutions was quite an abstract word in policy-making circles, but now it's really penetrating the sphere of those who have to take the decision. And we see that in the consultation of services, there is a real effort being made in listening to different viewpoints to get to a solution that is more efficient, more robust, and more systemic. But the ambitions on climate are so high that we need to mobilize all our knowledge and resources. Research is among the top contributors, not only because we need new technologies, but we need to have a broader and deeper understanding of society, how it functions, and how it can be changed or transformed. I wish here to mention one specific aspect, which is that we support through the research framework program, is the modeling. Transparent modeling, I'm insisting on the word transparent, modeling is a really useful tool to inform policy makers in the aftermath of COVID, coupled with the increased trust in science as a general trend. The increased trust in science, yes, I mean, at the beginning of the crisis, we all recognize that, but now we see that it's a bit more difficult because in every European country, the advices of the scientists on the deconfinement are somewhat challenged, and for good reasons sometimes. There are lots of uncertainties and it's difficult, but nevertheless, the tools that are being used and help in framing the debate and informing the debate, and this includes, of course, all the limits, the shortcomings, the caveats in these models. I would say, I refer here to the fact that Mario Giampietro calls these frequently on, and he challenges these simplistic economic narratives. He puts it on his slides. Yes, those are simplistic, but those are the ones that are used, and the increases in modeling help also in broadening the debate, and it is helpful. So we should not throw the baby with the bath, but use these models, use a critical view on the models, and to design quantitative narratives and to broaden the debate. And I think this is progressing quite a lot, thanks to your work in part, but also thanks to some opening in the policy circles. So now that the project is reaching to its end, I wish to say here that the dissemination plan for you is very important, and I would encourage you to implement it in your implement these activities really forcefully, as the knowledge needs to be further transmitted and understood by the relevant user. Please bear with those who may not have the background in the field to explain, to be really pedagogic. You are all teaching in universities, perhaps, and but not necessarily to policymakers. When you deal with those, take the time to explain what the terms mean and how the results can be useful in practice for their work. This is critical. So I wish to thank also Magic for having organized, actually, with the support of the JRC, a training course offered to the European Commission staff. This is a welcome development, and I hope that the contents of this course, and all the relevant material you develop for policymakers will be made available and will be easy to find. This is impossible. Important, not impossible. This is absolutely necessary to be able to access your findings, and that such findings are framed in the language that is understandable by those who will take the time to read it, actually. So I'm now keen to learn on how the insights and the understanding gained through Magic over the past 4 years can be developed to address the multiple challenges involved in the Nexus, including climate change, water, biodiversity, and food. To conclude, I would say that the acronym of the project was very well chosen because meeting the 1.5 degrees Celsius target may require something that goes beyond the usual rationality and action. Kind of a magic wand. In this context, I think that the best we can do is ensure that if the scientific messages do converge from different disciplines and are properly transmitted to policymakers, that would be perhaps the magical ingredient that will catalyze the action at scale that is needed. Thank you for your hard work, and I look forward to listening to you and reading on your key findings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Philip Talkins from the unit of Climate and Planetary Boundaries. I am Roger Strand. I represent the University of Bergen, and I will try to moderate this event today, and I will now take you through what we are going to experience. So the next thing that will happen is that there will be some talks, first by Mario Giampietro, the coordinator of the MAGIC project from the Autonomous University of Barcelona, then by Kirsty Blackstock from the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen, who also worked on the MAGIC project. We will get a comment from Zoltan Rakonchai, who is a colleague of Philippe, also at the DG Research and Innovation Unit for Climate and Planetary Boundaries. And we'll get a comment from Silvio Fontovic, University of Bergen, who also worked in the MAGIC project. Then at some point during the meeting, it will be the time for the audience to feed in. You can already now start to feed in questions in the Q&A button that you will find in your Zoom window. And the panel has promised to try to address as many questions in as wise as a possible manner in the allotted time. We have a session that will not last more than 1.5 hours, so it will mean that we will have to close at 5:30 Central European Time by the latest. Also, Philip mentioned the EU Learn course that we have developed the content for, and if I'm not mistaken, our colleague Angela Guimarães Pereira from the Joint Research Center has already put a link to that in the chat window of the meeting. Okay, so we heard a welcome address that reminded us of the importance and urgency. Now they switched the light off in my room, actually. Let's just see if we can do something with that. Importance and urgency of the present situation and the recognition of that among our governments. And we also got an outline of the project that it started in 2016 and it's in 2020, and it's called MAGIC. Actually, MAGIC is an acronym for Moving Towards Adaptive Governance in Complexity, Informing Nexus Security. And the coordinator was Mario Giampietro of this project. Some people have called it the finest and most groundbreaking research project in the entire Horizon 2020. It will, of course, be up to you in the audience to decide whether you think that is a true verdict. And you can pass that verdict after listening to our first two speakers. So, Mario, I give the floor to you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Since we don't have much time and we would like to have a discussion with the audience, I try to share the screen. If nothing happened, let's see. And then go for the presentation. Can you see the screen, full screen? Okay. So what is MAGIC? MAGIC, you already said, it's moving toward adaptive governance in complexity. It was a big project, 4 years. And what was special, was different, is that we were not going for numbers, but we were going for a process, the process required to make numbers. So
Mario?
Yes?
Mario? Can
yes.
you go into your configuración de visualización? Yes.
Okay, oops.
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you.
And then basically, we were not just jumping into crunching numbers, but we were just first discussing what were the themes, then what kind of information would be needed to deal with these different issues, then trying to have numbers, do what we call quantitative storytelling, so have different perception, different representation of the problem, looking at different dimensions, different scale, then going back to the policymaker or those that we were contacting, and then try to see whether they were looking at things in a different way, identifying other key elements, and going around in this cycle. The structure of the project was also different. Basically, we had one interface on the top of the Nexus dialogue space with the actors, and we interface with the EU staff or the Environmental European Agency, other actors. We had on the lower part, the Nexus information space, about a number where the data were stored and crunched. Then we had a Nexus structuring space where the quantitative storytelling was generated. And then we had two work package for with case studies, policy narrative and innovation narratives, and everything was then transferred to the Nexus Knowledge Hub. So what I'm presenting here, there are, you know, the story of the finger and the moon. We had a lot of fingers to show. We did 35 scientific articles, 12 more in the pipeline, and others in preparation, a lot of conference. What news is that we did a lot of videos. It's going back to Philip Tolkien's observation. We decided that enough scientific writing is not enough. If you want to transmit music, you have not to write down music on score, you have to sing. Basically, complexity requires movies or cartoons. So we did an 8-week massive open online course on Coursera that is doing pretty well, 8,833 learners the last time we checked, 23 video for uncomfortable knowledge lecture and the EU Learn, that we will discuss later about this, and 7 animated cartoons. But what is the moon? So what are the results of MAGIC? There are 3 main results of MAGIC. Is that 1, the main sustainability predicament is not the climate change, the resources, things, is that at the moment we are not capable of perceiving and structuring the problem that we are dealing. And this is due to the fact that we are intoxicated by the heavy use of simplistic economic narratives that prevent us to framing the problem of, and decide what we have to do. The second is that it is possible to avoid this induced ignorance if we complement the information given by economic narratives with other type of information obtained by using different narratives referring to different dimension, different scale, and different concern. Okay. So still, the creation of new and better analytical tools will not solve our problem. What we need is a different way of producing and using science, and this has to do with the insight given by postnormal science. If we want to improve the quality of governance, we have to use science in a different way. As mentioned before, with the COVID shows that you cannot just come out and say the experts say this or that, because there are problems that you cannot define in a way that you can optimize. So the MAGIC result number 1, what is the problem with the economic narrative? The reason is very simple. Economic narratives are based on the assumption that you have price. If you have price, there is moderate scarcity. There is no a sustainability crisis. If you have an absolute scarcity, then you do either a war and you ask violence, or you have to have solidarity and caring things. So basically, you don't use the market if there is a sustainability crisis. So what happened is that if we want to look at problem, innovation, to monitor, anticipate, solve, and prevent sustainability crisis, we cannot expect that the market will solve problem for us. This is not the way that we can get out of our problem. So we should stop and move on. So this is the famous killing curve, and is the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. On this, we can have the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit, and we can have the COP Kyoto, and where the economic narrative enters here with the tradable permit, with no caps to avoid to damage the economy. And the strategy is those that are emitting keep emitting, and they give money to those that are not emitting so that they can develop, emit more. Of course, unless you are not an economist, you cannot see how this strategy could lead to a reduction of emission, and actually it doesn't. And then we are doing other additional meeting. And what is impressive in this meeting, that there are a lot of emotion at the end of the meeting. People are just clapping, hugging each other. We saved the planet, yes, someone crying. And as a matter of fact, we are experiencing a parallel universe in which narrative economists are keeping people, they perceive that they are saving the world, but that is completely different from the perception of the people working at the Mauna Loa Observatory, that they are measuring a CO2 emission. They don't see anything happen, basically. And one question is, after decades of failure in climate policy, why doing more of the same should generate different results? So one big problem is that the economic narrative prevent reflexivity of learning. They don't even understand that things is not working. So what about prediction? Then this is where we get integrated assessment model with 100 question, and then they are generating scenarios like this one. And then basically, when I looked at this scenario, I remember this very funny cartoon that then a miracle occurs to solve your problem when you go to the left to the right. And these are the miracles that for which you need integrated assessment scenarios of decarbonization. In fact, how plausible is this graph? If you want to dramatically, almost totally eliminate CO2, you have to reduce the use of fuel with fossil energy. But biofuel are not getting anywhere. We have two papers and a few lectures on this, you can see. We do not have large-scale storage for intermittent electricity. The Energiewende and the failure in Spain show clearly that when you get to 30%, basically intermittent are generating more problem to the grid than solving. Hydrogen is still far away. But what is the most important problem, because we can agree on this assumption, but it is a systemic blunder in this type of model, is that if Greta tomorrow will become the emperor of the planet, and we stop all our economic activity and do an economy of war to producing alternative cement factories, alternative iron production, produce only cars that are electric, whatever you want, you change radically our economy, we will have for at least 10 or 20 years a massive use of fossil energy, because at the moment 85% of the energy we're using is fossil energy. We don't have alternatives. And then we will have a peak of emission before starting reducing. This is an economic principle, is not even a biophysical principle. You have a payback of investment. You have to invest money to save money, and the same is for energy. So what magic provided in this discussion? We generated what's called a Nexus structure in space, a way of looking at what happened in the economy, looking at different aspects, how the land is used, the labor is used, what type of different flows are used, what are imported or exported. And we are using this called quantitative storytelling that doesn't claim to present the truth, but because the numbers will always be contested, but present alternative stories and check the plausibility of what we are talking about. Just to give you an example, let's imagine we're discussing of food security. That is something that nobody seems to be worried, but we should. So if you're looking at the prediction for 2050, there are people that say that we will need 100%, 110% increase in food production. FAO say 60%, so it is different. But in quantitative storytelling, it doesn't matter. It is a lot of food to be produced. And at the moment, there is no way that we can produce this in an environmental friendly way. And this is extremely serious, because if you're looking at the situation of the biodiversity, I was in another project called Eclipse, that we were looking at the result of the International Panel of Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. This situation is extremely, extremely scary. So if I would be advising, I would say that probably we'll be more worried about the problem of food security than the sea level in the year 2100. What the economists say about that according to the economic statistics, Europe is not doing particularly badly. I mean, we are exporting and importing, and more or less we go in the same. So how we do that? With agribusiness. Agribusiness, we are extremely successful, to a point. The second exporter in the world is the Netherlands. Yes, the Netherlands. The Netherlands has 0.06 hectares of arable land per capita, less than China, and is also a small country. So basically, the Netherlands is exporting almost the double of Canada, even though it has much less arable land. As a matter of fact, if we are looking at economic data, the Netherlands export in value more than Canada and Argentina combined, 75 times more land. So what is the effect of the agribusiness on the farmers then? I mean, if you're looking at this, in 10 years, the Netherlands tripled the value of the agribusiness added value. So it should be heaven for farmers. As a matter of fact, not. Not exactly. The labor force fell 27% in 10 years. And if you're looking after that, it's keep going down. So agribusiness is not good for farmers. And what about the environment? What's environment? This is the problem. We have, this is one of our study, and then you see vegetable, animal, and feed, if they are imported, exported, how much are produced. And if you're looking at the third column on the right, the feed, this is the smoking gun. All the feed in Europe is imported. It is imported from Latin America, from developing countries. And there is, if you take out Ireland, all the European countries are importing more than 70% of their feed. And then this is what keep our agricultural sector, because Europe basically is running on animal product. And so when we are blaming Bolsonaro for the deforestation of Brazil, maybe there is some part of truth there, but for sure we are helping a lot. What would happen if in 2050, if the supply of food was not sufficient with an increase in demand due to population and change of diet, and we would have to produce more food in Europe? Just to give an idea, this is what you are getting in terms of the land that we are using. And the blue and purple is that we are actually using, and the brown and yellow is what is embodied in what we import. And we can clearly see that we would have to use basically all the European countries more land than we had. This would be, in terms of environmental impact, a real nightmare, because if you are trying to calculate how much water, fertilizer, pesticides, and labor would be required to produce in Europe what is at the moment externalized, would be a major disaster for the environment. There are a couple of papers that we just published. They've been 3 days ago, the upper one. We got the confirmation that has been accepted in press. There is another elephant in the room that I would like to go very quickly through, just to show you the problem with the farm to fork. If you're looking at the post-harvest section, when you talk about farm to fork, you can notice that agriculture is completely irrelevant. 80% of the energy and 80% of the money goes to the post-harvest. Even more impressive, if you are breaking down the type of expenditure. So you see that basically all the money, all the energy, the all resources are getting into industry, household, catering, things. What does it mean? That we are feeding the cities with convenience food. There is nothing to do with just producing food. So why this is relevant? Because if you're looking what are the reason for this type of expenditure and this type of cost, fresh vegetable and fruits are the culprit here. You are bringing around water with some nutrient very low density, very high losses. So what is just a stupid example, but I mean, we are now saying we are getting in the crusade for becoming vegetarian. In reality, if you're looking at the situation, it is not clear that if you are a vegetarian that want to have your fresh vegetable brought to your home in the plastic things, and then you have asparagus coming in an airplane from Peru, this is about reducing energy on food losses, on saving the planet. You should eat vegetable you produce in the countryside like it used to be in the past to save the planet. So what we did, we have a series of uncomfortable knowledge series, and then we are accepting the criticism of Philip that these things are very difficult. So we are using a strategy of progressive disclosure. You start with a cartoon, and then we have an animated cartoon inside of 90 seconds. Then we have a series of short videos explaining the problems, and then you can go there. Or we have as well policy cases. I think that this will be illustrated by Christy, sorry, so I will not waste time. So I get to the last two slides. What is the last result of magic? That we should go away from the idea that we are governing complexity, that we can predict and control, and getting in governing in complexity. We have to think about the caring and reflexive economy, which we are not in full control. What this will require is that we accept that the world is changing, and this is changing very quickly. The university are becoming useless, scientific journals becoming useless, newspaper, political parties, and then we have to update our identity at different scales. So we have to use uncomfortable knowledge rather than avoid. We had in our project very often, especially young students or PhD students, say, we cannot say that. We cannot say the circular economy is the policy ledge. And we have to say these things because it is time to reconsider what we do. So this is the last slide. What Magic proposed to do. Every time we are discussing our policy, there are at least three just narratives. One, why we are doing it, what we should do, and how do we know that this is the thing to do. And then these three narratives require three different types of quality check. One about the concern, one about whether or not this is feasible, winner or loser, and one is about the quality of the information that has been used. And what is important here, that each of these quality checks is affecting the others. So this is why we are proposing to have a procedural definition of these three narratives in a predicative way. This is why I have to go to cycles, rather than just crunching the number to be the optimal solution, because it's not the way it works. I would like to thank, before ending, the wonderful people of our consortium. This has been a crazy ride. And then I believe that without their faith, because at the beginning, a few of them were not particularly convinced about the fact that this was a good idea to go in this type of project, we would not have done what we did. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mario. I think the worst, absolutely worst scenario for a webinar and for an online meeting is that it's boring. And I'm pretty confident that none of the attendees found this or the welcome address to be a boring presentation. And then I see from the list of questions that are being posed that perhaps a few of the points are also being perceived as rather controversial, but we might get back to that. Now for the next presentation from the Magic project, and I leave the floor to Kirsty Blackstock from the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen, Scotland.
Okay, everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. And can you see the correct screen?
Absolutely, yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for letting me speak. A little bit of change in style, but hopefully very complementary to what you just heard from Mario. So I work at the James Hutton Institute in Scotland. I am a sociologist, and I have gone on a huge learning journey during the Horizon 2020 Magic project. And I want to talk to you about what we've learnt personally as a team and with the mixed peer community we've worked with. So what I want to talk about today is what we have learnt working with policy actors. This is really following on to Mario's last point about doing post-normal science and the importance of working with process. So often at the end of a project, we celebrate by demonstrating all the products that have arisen from our Horizon 2020 research. But what we want to point out from Magic is that it depends on the processes. And these processes involve both our research consortium members, but the wider actors involved in mixed teams. So this is not studying about policy or studying on policy, but working with policy actors. Next slide, please. Sorry, I can't control the screen, so next, great. So Mario said, as Mario introduced, quantitative storytelling is at the heart of what we do in Magic. So this is not just a technical participatory modeling cycle, but this is actually speaking to the ethos and philosophy. If you could just move on one animation, please. So we say this is at the heart of the Magic project because it's about the fact that we have this reflexive ethos of care. This is about not just doing a technical modeling cycle, but thinking about with whom we're working and what it might mean for their everyday lives and responsibilities. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to take you around very briefly what it means to do quantitative storytelling, because not everyone who's attending this webinar will necessarily have been involved in one of these cycles. So to start with, we identify the key themes or narratives relevant to the Nexus and to the policies that we're working with. So for example, in the work that I've been personally involved with, we've talked to 56 individuals from several EU level organizations. We did this to find out about their jobs, how they're involved in the policy process, and what they are doing for sustainable development goals or for implementation of various Nexus policies. We also back this up by building on what is already known and existing in policies and documents, not just what is known, but how is it expressed? What are the stories that are told in these documents and artifacts? Next slide, please. So then we move on to deciding what we can represent in societal metabolism analysis, which is the approach at the heart of the quantification, if you like, of our project. So for the work I'm going to talk about today, we work with an existing pan-EU dataset called the Farm Accountancy Data Network. So this is a deliberate choice. This is data that is used as part of the arsenal of people in DG Agri and other DGs. So it's data that people are familiar with, and it's basically taken from a representative sample of farms across Europe. If we could move on one animation. But the magic comes in by translating this data set through a societal metabolism grammar, which works across multiple scales from a macro, meso, and micro scale that looks at within a system and the inputs and outputs from the external system. And it looks at both economic and social and environmental issues within one accountancy framework. Next animation, please. And the key point of quantitative storytelling is this iteration between the existing data and this grammar, which makes it extremely powerful. It allows you to take a cross-scale and cross-issue analysis within a coherent and systemic framework. Next slide, please. So then this incredibly powerful grammar, as translated into what we call processes, generates an explosion of quantitative data, which we then have to try and tame back into some kind of metrics that we can present and discuss with people. So contextualize and present intensity and extent matrix. So how much have we got and how intensive is this metric? So I don't expect you to try and understand the circus, the circular colorful diagram, nor the map. These are illustrations just to say these are the kind of innovations or experiments, if you like, of trying to take this data and be true to the idea of societal metabolism analysis, such that we can, in the circus diagram, we can connect flows of green and blue water embodied within imported livestock feed, and we can connect them on the right-hand side, that's the 28 member states, and the left-hand side is the 14 FADM farm types. So we get a sense of where the embodied water is going, what kind of farms, in which geographic locations. If we move down to the geographic map, this again is a relationship map around pollinators and the pollinator index, and it gives us a sense of the relationship, this time going one level lower than member states, down to NUTS 2 region. So we can look across Europe and see how different farming types are doing in different geographical areas. So trying to express intensity and extent in time and in space. And in light of what Philippe said about transparent science or open science, we've just put these maps online today. You can see the web link where you can go in and you can play around with the parameters and you can explore the data and the thinking behind these maps and diagrams. So please do have a play if you're interested. Okay, next slide, please. So the whole point of quantitative storytelling is to use quantification to interpret and tell stories, and to maybe open up a different way of understanding our current situation in order to start co-producing some solutions. So once we generate these complex metrics and maps and diagrams, we then had feedback workshops and also individual feedback interviews. And that was really important to try and get a sense of what other people took away from our understanding of what the data told us. And we tried as much as we could to contextualize our findings in the policy developments. I mean, when we started this project back in 2016, as Philippe said, the context was really quite different. And there was much less talk about biodiversity and climate crises. And basically, as our project has evolved at the same time, the whole public dialogue and sense of urgency and acceptance, in fact, of the fact that we have a problem has really, really emerged. And it was very interesting doing the kind of feedback sessions in winter last year and spring this year against the backdrop of the farm to fork and the Green Deal just being developed. Next slide, please. So the idea we had is to do what we call some strategic cycles of QST and then move to policy-led QST. And I think the idea of strategic QST is this process really matters. We needed to get to grips with how societal metabolism worked and then how we could take the data and present it in meaningful ways. We were experimenting with doing things on paper in webinars. As you heard from Mario, people were developing cartoons and other mechanisms of explaining this quite complex methodology. However, if you could do the next animation, we didn't quite get to the policy-led QST, and this is for understandable reasons that I think takes us to the heart of one of the take-home messages from MAGIC. Next animation, please. So our ambition in MAGIC, and I think to a large extent we actually have achieved it, was to look across all of these 5 levels and multiple policy domains. So the very top level, societal demand. So, you know, how do people consume energy? How do we think about waste? How do we make a difference to our climates? Through supply systems, how do markets work? What are we trading? How do we use transport? The lens that we came in on and the work I'm talking about was production systems. So basically how agricultural commodities are produced and generated. But below that, there are a whole lot of choices. Beef is not just beef. Beef's produced in different farming systems, organic beef, grass-fed beef, intensively housed beef. And these different sequential pathways have a number of different production steps. So do you finish on grass or cereals, for example? So MAGIC is about trying to look across all of these levels and think about how these interconnections really matter if we want to think about sustainability. But if you could go to the next animation. So to go back to doing post-normal science, we needed actors who were interested in the red box. But if you could do the next animation, mainly we managed to find people who were interested in the blue box or an even smaller box. And this is not unexpected because mainly we were trying to engage with people who work within the EU institutions, and their role is to implement existing policy as effective and efficiently as possible. Their role is not necessarily to look at the red box and say, how could this be different? Yet that is precisely what MAGIC was aiming to do. So there was always going to be a tension and a challenge. But what we did find was there were sufficient people who were willing to turn up and engage with us, who even if they worked within the blue box, would try and think within the red box. If we could have the next slide, please. So co-learning in mixed teams. What we found and what I think we can say is that the diagnosis offered by the MAGIC suite of analyses and results is really salient, that all the things that are talked about in terms of the Green Deal, the need for a green recovery, both at member state level and the EU level, really chimes and in fact often was preempted by the results that Mario and other colleagues have presented through the suite of outputs. But when we took the information to these mixed team workshops, the participants expected us to provide them with technical solutions. And this was quite surprising to us, if we could do the next animation. Because we thought, because we had presented what we were doing as being slightly different, being post-normal, we thought we would go to these workshops to discuss and debate their interpretation of data? Did they agree with us? We wanted to learn. We didn't go as experts necessarily. We wanted to learn, what does this information mean for you doing your job as policy actors? And then co-produce solutions and ideas. So it was quite interesting to me that even though we were saying, well, you know, we don't know all the answers, we want to share and co-produce knowledge, people were still expecting us to come with solutions. Next slide, please. So I think one of the main take-homes I would like you to take away, as well as Mario's very provocative and sobering analyses of kind of where we are with the state of the water, energy and food nexus, is that what's really vital to transformation and to actually helping resolve these major issues is we need to focus much more on process learning. And we need policy entrepreneurs. We need people who are willing to understand and use their knowledge, their resources, their charisma, their passion to change things within the policy process. And so that means for those of you listening to me speaking who get invited to these kind of workshops, to come along to share knowledge, not just receive knowledge. Scientists are not the only experts in the room when we have these co-production processes. But this also means that, because I know those of you who've come along, even today, you're having to make space for these kind of discussions. You're having to squeeze them into an already very crowded and busy day. And often coming along to these events or sharing your knowledge is seen as additional to your role. And my argument is that for these projects, these research projects to really work, sharing knowledge with scientists must be part of a policy actor's role, not just additional. And I feel that we all need to be empowered to fail forward. You know, MAGIC has been a hugely ambitious project, and I will be the first to admit that some things we did well and other things we had to do a lot of learning, and we now know many things we could do better. But also with policy actors, often the rewards are to do the existing bureaucracy better, not necessarily to innovate and to try and experiment and adapt. And I think we really need to change that mindset. I think we need to think very carefully about knowledge ecosystems and recognize that when we call for greater participation, it's not just about citizen participation happening somewhere else, but all of the knowledge producers. So that's bureaucrats, parliamentarians, lobbyists, and scientists working together. I mean, it's very clear from Philippe's opening address that that is increasingly expected. I just think it's important that there's more energy and resource given to actually operationalizing this process. Next slide, please. But we have also actually done some more traditional policy support learning. So just a few examples here before I finish. So highlighted in the red box on the left-hand side is, for example, there is a proposal in the Farm to Fork action list that we convert the FADN data network to a farm sustainability data network. Now, some of the findings that we've come to through MAGIC is the need to have both material as well as monetary metrics, to have some more precision about what kind of materials are used, for example, in plant protection products. Actually knowing the ecotoxicity of different chemicals is really important if you want to actually translate pressures into impacts. So we can make some very practical examples about the kind of data gaps in the existing FADN process and how it could be made more fit for purpose to be a sustainability data network. If you look up at the proposed new CAP 9 objectives, I would like to propose that the quantitative storytelling using societal metabolism at its heart is exactly the kind of accountancy framework you need to tackle the wicked trade-offs that are going to be involved in trying to balance these 9 very laudable objectives. You really need a new and much more expansive and systemic methodology if you really are going to take account of climate change, you know, fair income, making sure your supply chain gives fair reward, and you have urban and rural renewal. You know, these are massive and very important objectives. It needs a new approach, and I think MAGIC has something to offer there. And I'd also like to say that some of the stuff that we have produced complements the existing common monitoring and evaluation framework, which is down in the lower right. Here, there's a really amazing suite, a dashboard of different metrics, but what we've managed to do is take it down a level below member state to NUTS 2, and to show the distribution by farm types to give more granularity of findings. Next slide. But I've talked quite a lot today about agriculture. I'd like to point out that if you look at the Green Deal and the different issues involved in the Green Deal, Magic has touched on nearly every aspect of that. And remember, the Green Deal we didn't know about it when we started Magic in 2016. So going from the bottom left-hand side, financing the transition. There's a policy brief around green bonds, and there's more technical reports around that as well. If you go up to the top left, preserving Europe's natural capital, policy brief about the importance of soil as a missing link in water, energy, food nexus. If you're interested in the circular economy, we have a policy brief around decoupling and a critique of that kind of idea. If you go down to the bottom right, decarbonisation of electricity. And I have given an illustration, just a couple of policy cases. So what I'd like to say is, if you're interested, there is policy learning and practical policy advice across nearly every aspect of the Green Deal coming out of the Magic project. Next slide, please. So I just want to end here to say that I think really Magic just reinforces a call that's made often, particularly in kind of post-normal and participatory approaches to science, that really we need to invest in processes, not just projects. So I hope Magic's legacy will be more than just specific policy advice, but actually be about building the relationships we've managed to build up between ourselves as scientists and within the wider actors. And I'd like to say that we haven't only worked with policy actors. There's been really impressive work done, for example, with farmers around water and access to water and water innovations, with citizens around electric cars, etc. And as if you watch the YouTube videos that Angela, our colleague at JRC, has produced about engaging, there's been a whole range of actors, but we've built relationships across geographies, across different types of actors. One thing that was really interesting is people really valued, when we're working at the pan-EU scale, just the fact that we had workshops that brought together different DGs and gave them a safe space to discuss issues. And I think that's another thing that these kind of projects can do, is to provide the spaces for people to come and talk together. We've done a lot of learning and sharing, and I'd like to say personally, it can be just as uncomfortable for us as the experts as it can be for others who are perhaps receiving some of this uncomfortable knowledge, but it has been thoroughly worthwhile. I'll come back to a bit more of what we think our final take-home messages are at the very end, but now I'd like to finish. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. So let me just see that we are. So after this bombardment of beautiful analysis from Mario and Kirsty, we move to, I'm eager and curious to know what you think, Zoltan Rakonjai, Policy Officer at the Unit for Climate and Planetary Boundaries. So would you like to share some of your comments with us?
Thank you very much, Roger, and presenters. It's been a fascinating presentation, or two presentations so far, and very much enjoyed it, as I did in earlier events. My name is Zoltan Rakonjai, and as it was mentioned, I work in the same unit where Philip Turkens, who gave the introductory remarks, works. And I've been following this project for only 2 years. I was not involved at the beginning, but it was a very pleasant experience when I first got engaged with the process and with the meetings of the project. Despite all these nice words, two expressions came to mind listening to especially the first presentation to Mario. And one is wicked problem, which is very often mentioned, and climate change is often described as a wicked problem, which is a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete knowledge and contradictory information and complexity. And the other, perhaps even less flattering expression is the dismal science, as Victorians, some Victorians described economics back in the 19th century. Without elaborating on these, perhaps just to give a personal reflection of how I came to these impressions, and without going into much detail, I would just link it to the slide of Mario with the Keeling curve. As you recall, where we saw the unabated increase of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere, and it was punctuated by events in the climate change process, various conferences of the parties of the Climate Change Convention. And I have had the good, or perhaps not so good, fortune of having been part of some of these conferences, and also some more of which were not marked on that curve. And it forces the reflection of what it is that we did wrong, or what should have been done differently. Because having been part of the process, there is no shortage of goodwill. Lots of people work very hard to achieve whatever we have achieved. And the curve shows not only that we are falling behind the originally expected objectives in terms of climate change mitigation, but the curve arguably is following very closely the RCP 8.5 scenario, which is one of the worst that the IPCC has been using in recent assessments. So, so Mario asked the question of what are we expecting? What different results are we expecting from doing more of the same? And if I took the message from the project correctly, then it would be the embracing of complexity. So if I put it correctly, that moving away from trying to govern complexity and moving towards governing within complexity. And that is an appealing suggestion, but again, referring back to the process I mentioned, it is complex enough as it is. And the same can be said about EU climate and environmental policy. So how can we embrace complexity without making the process unmanageably complex? So that's a big challenge for decision and policy makers, and also how to do it in a way that maintains sufficient transparency to maintain legitimacy for our actions. But that takes me to the second presentation, which very nicely reviewed the events that have taken place in the framework of this project. And I have had the good fortune of participating in a couple of these events. And I can confirm the value of the kind of information and knowledge that transpires from applying these approaches. in particular this quantitative storytelling approach. And it is really impressive, but it raises two issues, at least to my mind. There were two major questions that emerged. One of them is how to validate the outcome of this approach for policy development and implementation. So basically following this approach certainly reveals insight that is new and can be different from what we receive with conventional wisdom, but does it provide superior results when applied in practice? So that's one of the questions. But the other question is how we can apply these methodologies after the project runs its course and the people who have developed the approach and the methodologies are no longer there to run the exercise. And that reminds me a little bit to like going to a concert and enjoying the music while it lasts, and then after the concert one is left with a very elated feeling, but the musicians leave and they leave the instruments behind. And what if somebody wants to repeat the experience? I mean, there are two options basically. One option is to listen to the recording of the concert and relive the same thing, but that doesn't allow us to develop and to make progress. The other option is to learn to play the instruments and learn to play the instruments as well as the musicians have been doing it. And that is probably the only way, unless somebody can hire the musicians to play it for them. So I have to say that I'm not considering myself proficient enough in these methodologies to actually play these instruments like the quantitative storytelling and all that. So I don't want to take up more time, and I would like to perhaps stop here and allow the project participants to make use of this time and enlighten us as much as possible, and also to participants of the meeting to ask questions and make the best of this opportunity. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion and to the continuation or the closing of the project and the final reports and final deliverables, where I have to mention that one of the big and unusual contributions of this project is a considerable amount of humor that has gone into the outputs, and I think it is very, very important, partly to lighten the mood which everybody needs every now and then, and also to drive home the messages and to capture the imagination and the attention of people. So that is very much appreciated. So thank you very much again, and I remain here in case there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sultan, for these reflections that I think are really central to what we are discussing. What to do when the musicians leave, and who are the musicians, and how to both develop the institutions and while also keeping the legitimacy of what is being done within the institutions. And I will open the part of the webinar where we also deal with the questions that have been posed by the audience by expanding on this. There was a question from Anne van Bruggen on this concept of uncomfortable knowledge. So she asked, so what qualifies really as uncomfortable knowledge in these presentations? What is this concept? Is it the potential disasters for agriculture in our future if we keep status quo that is what is uncomfortable, and how to understand this? And I think at this point I would like to invite Silvia Fontovic from the University of Bergen to reflect on the concept of uncomfortable knowledge and the legitimacy in the institutions.
Thank you, Roger. I will be very short, and I think most of the questions have been and are being handled through the chat with the links and other type of inputs. I think the question of legitimacy of institutions is very, very important, especially when there is a widespread concern about institutions that are losing not only legitimacy, but also credibility. It seems that credibility and legitimacy are like two horns of a dilemma, where in trying to keep legitimacy, you lose credibility, and the other way around. I don't have a lot of solutions, and nobody has. And that's the first lesson we have to learn. And I would say that 2020 has been quite an exceptional year. And we shouldn't underestimate the consequences of the COVID pandemics. I believe we should not return to the apparent pre-COVID normality even if we could. And that raises a lot of uncomfortable, not only knowledge, but also uncomfortable questions. And it was said, and everybody knows, that the need for deep transformation were already in the institutional and public agenda, and they were justified by environmental and society crises, and those were the bread and butter of the MAGIC project. So what I mean is, people think, should we return to the normal? Can we return to the pre-COVID normal? And I'm saying quite clearly, it's my position, even if we could, we shouldn't. And it is precisely because the issues were already there before COVID and the pandemics. Now, going to the more deeply into the question of legitimacy and uncomfortable knowledge and questions, is that, in my view, one of the main obstacles to deep transformations, and we have to see if we do this year a kind of poll like it was with post-truth a couple of years ago. Transformation is a very important word, and everybody's talking about transformations. So my feeling is that one of the main obstacles to deep transformation is how are we going to transform? And MAGIC has provided some insight in how to design, deploy, and sustain a high-quality process. And my view is that we shouldn't be very concerned about the products, which are necessarily ephemeral and transitory. And if we trust the process, if the process has legitimacy and credibility, then surely people will also trust not only the products, but also the awareness that we have to experiment, and therefore we are going to make mistakes. And that's a big endeavor for institutions to take. How do you explain, without losing credibility and legitimacy, that because we are talking also about the complexity of the issues, then that implies unpredictability, that implies uncertainty and even ignorance. and even to know what you know and perhaps ignore what you don't know. So how do you change a culture which expects prediction control to a system that will be able to cope with the unpredictable nature of the predicament? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Silvio. Also, the other panelists can raise their hands either digitally or physically if you want to add something. I have 3 questions from what we have received that I think come together in following up on what you just said, Silvio, which is about how do we do more concretely this process, this part of the quantitative storytelling process that is in the interaction between policy and the science. And I think I would like to read these 3 questions, and perhaps Kirsty would like to reflect on, and possibly also others in the panel. So 3 of them are quite related. Zinabu Bolda asks, please would you share the key intervention of policy actors towards magic? As the interventions of policy actors towards magic. Philip Tolkins also asks us, do we have a way to collect feedback on, for instance, our policy briefs from users? So how do we deal with the system talking back to us? And also a question that goes into this from Anne van Bruggen, where she writes, I've seen many participatory methodologies are being developed separately instead of learning within coherent frameworks conducive to transformation and empowerment of stakeholders. What are the ways forward? I think this comes together to sort of one theme. And I wonder, Kirsty, if you have some additional thoughts on that.
I will do my best. I will start with the most tractable and work up. So Philippe, do we collect feedback on our policy briefs? My understanding is that there's no kind of automated feedback mechanism. They're hosted on the existing Magic website, which will be migrated to a legacy platform called Uncomfortable Knowledge. But we do have within the website a contact us button, and every policy brief has authors with emails. And so anyone is welcome to provide feedback, but I guess there's no actual feedback kind of formal mechanism. And so that's a useful learning point for the future. But what we did do, which I think was really important as part of the QST second loop that we did, was we actually did some feedback interviews, and they were very informative. And it was very kind of people to give up their time about how they found being part of the QST process and what kind of things they wanted. And I would thoroughly recommend doing that for anyone who wanted. So Zoltan said, you know, how do we teach people to play the instruments? And I would say some of the steps in QST are not necessarily particularly technically onerous. They just require time, energy, and perseverance. So perhaps that comes to the question about how we have methodologies and how we make them coherent, about transformation and empowerment. There is a wealth of how-to guides about participation and stakeholder engagement and empowerment. A lot of this knowledge is available. I think what's perhaps understood is the amount of energy that you need to give to it. So you need to find people. You need to think about what's in it for them. Why would they give up their time? What can we do for them? And we don't always get this right, even in Magic. You know, we work really hard to try and think about what we can offer and how it might be useful to people's day jobs, but we didn't always get it right. The feedback interviews, some people were quite blunt in saying, well, this is really interesting, but not of any immediate use to me and my job. But I think it's not just about the kind of facilitation skills or how do you run a good webinar, but just, you know, do you have the intention to build a relationship? Do you want to facilitate a relationship? Will you act on what people tell you? Will you make space for that knowledge? Will you validate and recognize their expertise as much as your own? And that's a mindset as much as So I think, yes, we need training, but it's not just training in the technical issues, it's training in the mindset, if you like. And I think it should always be part of and not a separate stream of the wider scientific framework. And that does slightly put in tension, if you like, the point about what happens next, because the idea of these projects is to give people some ideas, challenge them, ask them to see problems in new ways. And I guess part of what Magic's legacy is, you know, none of us, fingers crossed, are going anywhere. We may no longer be funded as a Magic consortium after today, but we are all still available to carry on these conversations, these ideas. So yes, use us, use our expertise, share your issues. Let's see where we go. I'll stop talking and let others speak.
Thank you, Kirsty. So I was happy to hear that you offer a 24/7 service for all of us, and we will surely be available. I think I would also like to ask if Angela Guimarães Pereira would have some thoughts on this, as you've been working both within the Magic project and you also work within the European Commission, and I think you have a unique perspective on where is the knowledge, and the knowledge is probably in many places, right?
Yeah, I think one of the key insights that we have in Magic is also that the way these projects are put together. And I think it was particularly felt in this project that the Commission is not just a user of the outputs of this project. The Commission should be involved as a knowledge holder. And I think this changes everything, and changes also the commitment, and also changes the way we can negotiate also language and outputs and so on. So I would think that the recommendation since I am from another service, another recommendation for RTD and the agencies that support the funding of projects is that in projects such as Magic, where there is such a relationship with policy making, that the policy DGs are involved as knowledge holders in the process and not just as users of beneficiaries.
That was a very concrete suggestion. Unfortunately, I'm looking at my clock. We have only 9 minutes left. I would like to propose that we extend the seminar with 15 more hours, but probably we are not allowed to do so. This means that we will begin to round off quite soon. Before I give the word to Mario, who might want to comment also on these issues, I would like to remind the people working within EU institutions of the EU Learn training course. I think the link has been provided. Angela is nodding. And so this is an offer for people working within the EU institutions. And then also there are a wealth of lectures and other things on our website. So basically the same material is available to everybody. Mario, we have perhaps talked quite a lot about process now, around how the good interaction between policy and the world of science can take place. I also think that this is modeled on an idea that what the role of science is not to provide more decimals after the comma in some kind of modeling exercise, but actually also addressing knowledge gaps that are of a quite different sort.
Yeah, I would say that the conclusion, I mean, I had a question about why it's wrong, the idea that travel permit or something like that. I would say that the real problem we have, not on the human side, but the other side, is that we are really getting in trouble with the ecosystem, with nature. And of course, economic narrative, you cannot see this side at all. Natural processes are not included in economics, cannot be included. The idea that you're asking the ladies on the market, what is the value of whales, really is not a good idea to make policy about how to have whales alive. So what is the point here is that I believe that it is important everyone understand that we need a better way of framing the issues. And then we should not expect, because what is bad about actual framing of the issue, that yes, we can, the market and the business model will solve our problems. This is not the right way. We have to solve our problem on our own. And we have to solve our problem with passion. Why I'm saying this, because if we will have a sustainability problem for real, there are two possible ways of handling: with violence, war, of solidarity, caring for each other. None of these two solutions are compatible with the framing of economics, that we are optimizing, doing the best possible things, and then the technology will solve our problems. So I believe that we should internalize in the way we are framing the issue, developing policy and things, this concept deeply. We have to move from an economy that is optimizing the profit or the technical progress to an economy that is taking care of the people and taking care of the concern of the people. And this is the issue here. And how to do it, we have a lot of experts here around, but if we don't start with trying to understand the problem in a different way, the problems are complex. The emissions do not depend on the technology, depend on how much you are trading. Of course, we are printing 1 trillion of euros per year, and then we import from China, and we are reducing emission. Fantastic. This has nothing to do with tradable permit or with better technology. Maybe the Chinese have better technology than we have. It's simply that we are no longer producing in Europe. So if we keep making analysis of something which has nothing to do with what is happening, it is very dangerous to solve problems. They are very serious. I don't know if this is a good wrap up of my point of view.
Thank you very much. I think it is. I think it is. There are more questions that have been posed by the audience. Some of you will find that your questions have been answered in the writing there. So there are also answers inside the Q&A portion. I think also for those who will leave the webinar without their answers, without the questions being answered, you are very welcome to contact us afterwards. Before I give the word to Kirsty, and we are moving towards the end, I would also like to check with Zoltan if you would like to give an additional comment at this stage. You would simply just switch on and intervene as you wish. And then I think Kirsty, several people ask in the Q&A that what are we going to do now? I mean, in part you answered it, right? You said that we will be round the clock available for queries from policymakers, but also in terms of research, people ask, what is the next step of post-Magic Nexus and the development of the method?
Thank you. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but obviously we are aware of the Horizon 2020 call to support 10 different aspects supporting the Green Deal, and we are hopeful that we can take Magic forward to do more research in this area. But I think the point I was making, yeah, of course, not 24/7, but Magic didn't only produce products, it also gave the consortium 4 years of very intensive training in new ways of approaching sustainability and new methods. And I feel that part of the payback for that public investment is that we then take these out, and for example, in Scotland, we will be using the magic philosophy with the Scottish government. I'm sure that's true of all our partners. They will be engaging whatever project, whichever stakeholders, they will be different people in 2020 as they were in 2016. So whatever project we go through next. But just more concretely, I know, for example, there is an EEA report coming out about agriculture and water, and some of the magic methodologies getting incorporated into that. I'd see in the chat there's an invitation to brief another set of policy actors. So yeah, I think we continue with the dissemination. I'd like to just say very concretely that the website will stay live for some time, and then it will migrate to a legacy platform called Uncomfortable Knowledge. So all the products will be available for use, and a number of them are training materials to actually empower and tool up people to use the philosophy themselves. You don't necessarily need us to do the ethos of quantitative storytelling. Okay.
Thank you very much. I hope that the audience have got a glimpse of a very interesting and rich project. We spent 90 minutes. That was a 20,000 times compression of what we have done over the 4 years. And then we'd just like to thank everybody for your attendance, for your participation. And hopefully we'll see you back in some years when we have done the next project that may be called Miracles or something else. Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.